Hello! This is one of the first studio tutorials I am making over voice. You can probably tell why I wasn't using a microphone before, because this mic's quality, frankly, has shit quality. So, I will just try my very best to explain this to you in an understandable manner. So, to create a loading GUI, we need to insert a GUI in the starter GUI called loading GUI, or anything that you prefer. You just need to have a sort of naming scheme going for yourself. Then, what I like to do is inserting a canvas group to make a composite instead of a container, because what does this allow me to do? If I take an image label here and an image button, these both look the same, but if I switch this one, put it above this one, usually changing these two transparencies, background transparency, there it is, and then going over to change the image transparency, where is it? There it is, to 0.5, add 0.5, you will quickly see that these two overlap. But once I change this to 1, revert these transparencies back to 0, and change the canvas group's group transparency. You see that? Composite shading! This also works for colors, but that's not what we're going for today. So we're gonna leave these values alone. All this canvas group needs to have is a transparent background. It needs to be anchored at 0.5 at the center of the screen, position at 0.5, size 1 in the Udem 2 scale. Get rid of these. We rename this to composite or whatever. So we genuinely want a background, right? So we move this back to the center by positioning it at 0.5 with anchor point 0.5, putting the size up to 1. And for the background color, we're going to do something funky. We're going to leave this white, the color. We're going to go over gradient. In this gradient, we're gonna angle it at 24, let's say. Then we choose color 1 to be a nice cold shade of gray, and color 2 to be more brighter, maybe something like this, yeah. So we have a nice gradient going across the screen. So we rename this to background, void, BG, whatever you want. I'm gonna name it BG for convenience sake. And we're gonna add an image label, which will be our hypothetical logo. So we're gonna position it at the center of the screen X and center of the screen Y with a little bit of an offset. So we're gonna say 0.65 at anchor point 0.65. That's a little low. Let's try 0.45. That's a little low still. Let's try 0.35. That's more like it. So I don't actually have any logo on power right now. So this will just stay our hypothetical logo. So what I do for image labels is I change the background color to 0 and the transparency to 1, so that it doesn't flash the viewer when the image is not loaded in yet. So with that out of the way, we are going to move on to the loading bar. So the loading bar is a topic on its own. People make it in their way. I have my own little way. I create a canvas group again for a better looking bar. Set its size to be something like, I don't know, 0.75 of the screen. Position it at the center of the screen again with a bit of an offset, this time at 6.5. Maybe a little lower actually, at 7.7 I mean. Make the size Y be maybe 0.15, no, that's way too big. 0.05, that's a little fat, so let's just change it down to 0.15, yeah, that looks good. We are going to change its background color to 0. The background transparency can stay at whatever you want. The background color can actually also be whatever you want, I just prefer it to be 0. You can also make it a little gray shade to fit in with the background a little more. Then we're going to add a corner, a UI corner, and we're going to set this to 1 to give it a nice round corner. You may not see it because the quality is so small, but this is now perfectly spherical because we have a scale of 1 on this, not a pixel size of 1. So what we're gonna do now is rename this to bar BG, and inside of this bar BG, we're going to add another frame. This time, the frame will be anchored at 0.5. The size will be y is 1 on the scale, and x is 0 on the scale. Now, this frame may have disappeared, sure, but as soon as you position it correctly at y.5 and start changing the scale x to 0.5, let's say, that would be 50% full, it appears like this. Now, do we also want a rounded end part of the bar? Sure, let's do that. We're just copying this UI corner. Usually, you do this by Control-Shift-V to paste into, and now it has a nice round edge. With that being done, we will set this back to 0, so 0%. If you want to implement a percentage label or assets loaded out of max assets label, that's entirely on you. I am not going to make a whole loading screen for you. You can learn this yourself. It's not my job to make a script for you that you can fully copy. This is just a tutorial, a base to go off of. So here we are done. Now we insert a script into this, a local script into this GUI. We just call it game loader or something. Now up here, we're going to require a content provider and the collection service. Next, we're gonna grab the GUI, so local root GUI is what I like to call it, is the script parent, and composite is root GUI, wait for child, composite, and we don't need the background, so we're just gonna grab the bar and the bar BG, so local bar BG equals composite, wait for child, bar BG, and local bar fill equals composite, wait for child, bar BG, wait for child. I did not rename this, did I? Nope, let's just call it fill. So, fill. So, what is this? This here is the background of the bar. It's just the black part of the bar. The visual representation of the progress is this one. This is the fill of the bar. You understand? Good. What are you talking about? I don't want a text label. Usually how tutorials like to go about this is local assets to preload. Local assets to preload equals game GetChildren. This right here. This is stupid. Do not do this. This does not help you at all. What you want to do is go into replicated storage, create a folder, call it .preload, and you want to insert, or let's say grab a texture of one of the objects in this map, put it in here, call it, I don't know, grid texture or something, because this is, if we disable this UI, just everything here is the same grid texture asset. So essentially, we're going to preload this grid texture, alright? We are going to tag this with preload. Local assets to preload equals collection service get tagged preload. Now, what this does, this exact line here, it turns a table with all instances in the game that are tagged with preload. So, our texture right now. Now, we make a for underscore I in I pairs assets to preload do. It's already suggesting this, which is fundamentally wrong. So, what we want to do is, if I is a texture, then now we're running this if the preload asset is a texture object, which this here is. So we are going to content provider preload async, which is basically preload and wait table I.texture. What does this do? Basically, I is an instance, cannot be preloaded. I.texture, however, is an ID, can be preloaded, okay? So we want to grab this ID, which in this case is this ID. You may steal this if you want to, I don't care, it's just a grid texture, probably even the default texture of the baseplate, I am not sure. If this is a texture, we preload async the texture of the texture object. I know it sounds confusing because of Roblox's naming, but basically what this does, it preloads this content ID list. Okay, don't be fooled by this any. This any does not resolve the ID of any object. We are just going to i.texture. This here is the correct way to do this. I am not going to finish this script, but currently, once this preload is finished, we're just not doing anything. So we might want some output for when something preloads. So we define a function on preload. On preload, this basically just is a function, and in this we write preloaded an asset. Okay, so now as callback function, as argument 2 of PreloadAsync, this is something that most people do not know about, that PreloadAsync has a callback function that launches whenever preloading finishes, so we call on preload. Now, whenever this finishes preloading something, this function right here is called when this finishes. Get it? So now, if we play the game, there we go. Do not use texture content, use texture. For some reason texture content doesn't work, but here we can see preloaded an asset, which means our PreloadAsync has finished loading one asset, that is. If you actually want to know when it finishes loading all things, we just add a simple print preloaded all assets after this for I loop, and I'm just gonna add some more textures here so it has something else to do. It'll probably cache these, so I'm not sure if it does anything, but see, this is working great right here. We have how many to reload? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and it preloaded an asset 8 times, which means it preloaded all these 8 things. In this case, it just preloaded the same thing like 8 times, which is not what you're supposed to do and not recommended, but it was just an example, okay? Don't take it too seriously. But preloaded all the assets fired after these 8 preloads, which means we have preloaded everything. And if you want to expand on the script, make sure that you add if statements for every other type of asset you want to preload. So if I is an animation, for example, then you want to content provider preloadAsync i.animation ID. I'm not going to finish this. I'm not going to complete this script. You can do that yourself. You, the viewer, can do that yourself, okay? I am not letting you copy the script, okay? You are actually going to learn something from this. Understood? So that's basically it. This is it for the preloading part. Now, what we want to do is, on preload, we want to change the bar's size, okay? We're going to go back to this UI here. Hypothetical logo, the bar. So now, whenever it preloads, we want to change the bar size. How do we do that? Well, first of all, no, we don't change the bar size every time this function launches. We add local total asset count equals hashtag assets to preload. What does hashtag assets to preload mean? When you put a hashtag in front of a table like this, it just means how many instances there are in this array. So essentially, this would be 1 right now, because we have 1 asset to preload, not 8. So this would just equal 1 asset. So next we're going to add a loaded asset count, which is going to be 0 because we start at 0, obviously. So on preload, we are going to loaded asset count plus equals 1. This adds 1 to the loaded asset count. So stop spoilering AI. So now what we're going to do, what we're going to do is we're going to get the bar fill size and define it to this AI, bro, I can't. udem2.new, or let's do from scale because we're not really working with offset here. We're gonna predefine y as 1 because we don't need a y here. Here, we are going to loaded asset count divided by total asset count. This basically returns a number from 0 to 1, depending on how many assets there have been loaded, okay? Now, I'm just going to add some more things here and add a weight 1 between each preload to demonstrate this. But now, every time on preload launches, so every time something finishes loading, this is going to update the bar fill size to the asset count. So again, 0 equals 0%, 1 equals 100%. This AI, I can't. So what we're gonna do now is we're gonna test this. We're gonna see, oh, it's climbing, and it's done. Preloaded all assets. So how you want to handle this GUI disappearing is totally up to you. Here I'm just gonna say root GUI.enabled equals false. So it's just gonna disappear right after it's done. Perfect. It works. Now the assets are actually preloaded too, so whenever you pull up this grid texture here, for example, it will not lag behind, okay? So in conclusion, do not game GetChildren, okay? Do collection service get tagged preload, alright? This just returns instances, and like 99% of the instances this returns are not preloadable. So you cannot preload a card, you cannot preload a model instance, you cannot preload a humanoid, you cannot preload a service. You can only preload asset IDs, which is why this approach here is garbage, stupid, and lazy. I hope you understood what I explained here. That's been me. Have a nice day.